played in Minnesota. There's no diss on Minnesota. There's no diss on lower market teams, but he'll get out of Minnesota.
Okay.
I mean, that's just what happens. He can change the world with basketball. With
Where should he go?
Personality.
Being a Minnesota Timberwolves fan clearly is an extremely painful experience. And unfortunately for the Timberwolves, it seems like things are about to get a lot worse. So before we get to the content, we are on the grind to 1 million subscribers, and we only upload whenever there's good stuff to upload onto YouTube that pertains to the NBA and basketball. So make sure you subscribe and turn on our notifications to help us in that goal. And now that we got all that out of the way, cue the intro. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? The Minnesota Timberwolves seem to consistently be in this cycle where they have a once-in-a-generation type star on their roster. Then they fail to compete for championships, things start to look good, and then all of a sudden, that star gets disgruntled, they trade that star for a plethora of assets, and they have to rinse and repeat that process. And what's really frustrating about the Minnesota Timberwolves is they always come so close to building a truly dominant team, and they just do one thing to screw it all up. The earliest example, I guess, would be Kevin Garnett. During the Kevin Garnett era, they actually did a pretty good job putting together a good team around him. Kevin Garnett gave his best years of his career to the Minnesota Timberwolves. Prior to the 2007 to 2008 season, the Timberwolves would trade him to the Boston Celtics for what was at the time a historic haul. The Timberwolves would shortly be the laughingstock of the entire NBA. They would undergo some very challenging years tanking with some draft picks that they would get memed for, such as having back-to-back picks in one of the deepest NBA drafts of all time and selecting 3 point guards in that first round. The 5th pick being Ricky Rubio, 6th pick being Johnny Flynn, and the 18th pick, which would eventually get traded to Denver, being Ty Lawson. The best part about this is Ricky Rubio and Johnny Flynn weren't necessarily the greatest duo to play with one another, and yes, Ricky Rubio was essentially a draft-in stash, but the fact that they selected 2 point guards right before Steph Curry will always go down in infamy. Hell, they selected Ty Lawson over Jeff Teague, who by the way was an all-star, and even if he didn't become an all-star, at the very minimum you'll have a guy that would tell funny stories in the locker room. During the Kevin Love era, there wouldn't really be that much hope. The Minnesota Timberwolves would once again be mired in mediocrity. So once again, they rinsed and repeated. They had a once-in-a-generation type talent on their roster, and when he got disgruntled with the team, they ended up trading him to the Cleveland Cavaliers. This time, the haul that they received from the Cleveland Cavaliers was also historic. I don't think there's ever been a trade in NBA history that yielded 2 back-to-back #1 overall picks. The Timberwolves would get Anthony Bennett, Thaddeus Young, and Andrew Wiggins. And back in 2014, in the NBA draft, Andrew Wiggins was dubbed as the greatest NBA prospect since LeBron James. Yeah, they wouldn't call someone that for another 2 years when Ben Simmons would come out of the NBA draft. And things would once again look promising for the Timberwolves in the Andrew Wiggins era. The next year, once again, the Timberwolves would have the opportunity to add another #1 overall pick to their roster, getting the opportunity to select a true unicorn at the center position in Karl Anthony Towns. I can't believe it, but it's been 8 years since the Timberwolves selected Karl Anthony Towns, and there's been moments where it seemed like this team actually knew what it was doing. The Minnesota Timberwolves would do a wonderful job during this era. They had Andrew Wiggins, Zach LaVine would select Karl Anthony Towns. This team was truly on the up and up, but once again, they found a way to mess everything up. Instead of focusing on the development of Andrew Wiggins and Karl Anthony Towns, they decided to trade Zach LaVine, Chris Dunn, and a #7 overall pick to the Chicago Bulls for Jimmy Butler. This was a catastrophe. Not in the sense of Jimmy Butler would still get his, but Jimmy Butler just didn't fit with the Minnesota Timberwolves and their mentality. Jimmy Butler already had problems with Tom Thibodeau towards the end of his Chicago Bulls tenure, and that entire situation ended in a catastrophe where Jimmy Butler would famously show up to work one day and destroy the Minnesota Timberwolves starting 5 with all of the backups. The story is probably told better by Jeff Teague, so if you want to hear it, here it is.
Jimmy ain't came to no workout. So workout start in September, we don't see Jimmy. Nobody's talking. Jimmy decides to show up. We start training camp. He comes 3 days after training camp starts. All-Star. He comes in. We all think Jimmy about to practice. Like, Jimmy want a new contract. Jimmy want a new contract. We think Jimmy gonna practice. Jimmy ain't practice. Jimmy laying on there getting stretched out, getting massage while we running laps. He diving for loose balls. Steve said, we're gonna scrimmage. Jimmy hop up. I'm playing. Jimmy said, I ain't playing with them. Jimmy said, I'm playing with them. He picked the bad news Bears. It was there, no offense, but everybody in there, they wasn't gonna make the team. He's like, I'm playing with them. We playing first game. He's like, I got Cat. I was like, oh shit. So Jimmy and Cat ain't like each other. That's another part of the story I get to one day. They ain't like each other. That gets real funny when they don't like. You throw it to Cat first play. Jimmy steal it. Go down, score. They go down, score. Like, come on, Cat, post his little ass up, man. He can't guard you. Blah, blah, blah. Jimmy like, get out of here. He trash. Da, 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 da. Steal the ball again. They go down and score. Jimmy start talking to the GM. Everybody in the gym. Y'all better mother effing pay me. I'm like that. I'm like, he is nuts. Cat finally scored. He too little. I'm like, yeah, Cat, talk to that mother. Man, he ain't nothing. Da, da, da. Jimmy ain't scored at all. He just stealing the ball and passing to people, getting assists, just playing the right way. But he like doing everything. Time run out. They win. They beat us like 18-6, right? And Jimmy going crazy. Y'all think that team can win without me? I'm him. Pay me. Pay me. Mind you, he ain't took off his Jordan warm-up yet, right? He finally takes it off. He got the Timberwolves shirt on, but he cut the Minnesota out so it's just chest. Wow. He cut the Minnesota out the shorts, it's just shorts. He out here with a hole in the middle of his shirt, on the middle of his leg. So I'm crying now. Yo, I'm crying. I'm like, yo, bro, crazy. He like, I just beat them with the G League. This is your starters? So now I'm laughing. I'm still crying, laughing, but I'm like, hold on, he talking about me. Yeah, I'm one of the starters. I'm like, hold on. Like, so I'm mad now. To me, all of us like, nah, F that. Like, we got to play again. So Tibbs like, nope, second unit, you got them. They beat the second unit. So we turned up. We all on sideline. Yeah, hey, come on, let's go. Yeah, we talking crazy. Jimmy just darts to the locker room. I'm talking about run fast as hell. So we play the second unit. We beat him. We all run the locker room like, Jimmy, bring your back out here. We want to play again. Jimmy gone. We keep playing. We have practice for like another hour. We all showering. We go in the locker room. ESPN pop up.
You know what time it is?
Rachel Nichols, Jimmy Butler on TV. We like, what the? He like, yeah, I just killed them at practice and I think they all good players. We like, what? Hold on. I can't make this up, bro. He came and killed us and dipped on y'all and did an interview at home. One of the most iconic moments I've ever been a part in basketball, bro. How you set up an interview knowing you about to kill?
Eventually, the Minnesota Timberwolves would trade Jimmy Butler to the Philadelphia 76ers. But at that point, the damage has been done. That very pick that the Minnesota Timberwolves traded to the Chicago Bulls would have ended up being a seamless fit next to Karl Anthony Towns. But it would get worse from there. The Minnesota Timberwolves, once again, would do everything they possibly could to put together the most competitive roster they possibly could. Andrew Wiggins' confidence was in the gutter. He was truly not developing into the player that was supposed to be the greatest NBA prospect since LeBron James. So what would the Minnesota Timberwolves do? They would trade Andrew Wiggins to the Golden State Warriors alongside a top 3 protected 2021 first round pick, a second round pick, in exchange for Jacob Evans, D'Angelo Russell, and Omari Spellman. This is considered to be one of the most lopsided trades in NBA history. And to make things even worse, Andrew Wiggins would develop into the all-star that he was supposed to be, or at least a very good role player with the Golden State Warriors. All of a sudden, this man's shooting 40% from 3. Something that the Minnesota Timberwolves couldn't do in 5 years with Andrew Wiggins was quite literally done within a couple of months with the Golden State Warriors. But luckily for them, help was on the way. Minnesota Timberwolves would select Anthony Edwards with the #1 pick in the 2020 NBA draft. And clearly this was a hit. I mean, there's no question in anyone's mind. Anthony Edwards is developing into a star right before our very eyes. He has a killer mentality, loves the game of basketball, and everyone that plays with him seems to love him. Problem is, well, why don't you just listen to Patrick Beverley telling you what the problem is?
Does he need to get out of Minnesota?
He will get out of Minnesota.
Okay.
I mean, that's just what happens.
Evolution.
You feel me?
Okay.
And that's no disrespect to Minnesota. It's just, you feel me, with that personality, he can change the world with basketball.
Patrick Beverley thinks that Anthony Edwards is going to leave. Why? Because once again, in typical Minnesota Timberwolves fashion, the Timberwolves decided to make a series of truly horrible moves that took this team from a potential contender to a team that might never make it to the NBA playoffs. And we really started to see the cracks last year. In the offseason, the Minnesota Timberwolves would trade 4 first-round picks and a pick swap, in addition to Malik Beasley, Patrick Beverley, Leandro Bolmaro, Banchero, Jared Vanderbilt, and Walker Kessler, who by the way looks like a stud, in return for an outdated traditional center that appears to be a little past his prime, Rudy Gobert. Rudy Gobert is getting paid a tremendous contract as well. I don't even think the Utah Jazz got that much for Donovan Mitchell as they did for Rudy Gobert. And Donovan Mitchell is a significantly more valuable player than Rudy Gobert is. And you would see the disdain that Anthony Edwards had towards Rudy Gobert throughout the season. There were reports about how little Anthony Edwards would pass the ball to Rudy Gobert. At this point, Anthony Edwards doesn't really have a choice but to respect Rudy Gobert because he's going to be his teammate for the foreseeable future. But the Minnesota Timberwolves might find themselves backed into a corner once again. The Rudy Gobert trade set them back so much that they traded D'Angelo Russell to the Los Angeles Lakers and traded for Michael Conley just so they could have a player that has familiarity with Rudy Gobert. So why am I bringing all this up? Well, the cycle is about to repeat itself. Karl Anthony Towns was once considered to be the player that every NBA GM would want to build their roster around back in 2016. And just like that, out of nowhere, his value plummeted. Karl Anthony Towns is a free agent next year, and the Minnesota Timberwolves clearly don't have a future at this point. They don't have any assets. They're not playoff contenders. They certainly aren't playoff contenders, and it seems like they consistently make the wrong moves. Why would Karl Anthony Towns ever want to stay on the Minnesota Timberwolves? Which means there's a good chance that he's going to get traded for a plethora of assets. Probably not going to be as historic as the Kevin Garnett trade. Probably not going to be as historic as the Kevin Love trade. This may be closer to the Andrew Wiggins trade or the D'Angelo Russell trade. If he does get traded, and if he doesn't, he's probably going to leave for nothing, which means the Timberwolves are going to continue to get worse and worse and worse. A lot of people are saying that Anthony Edwards is destined to leave the Minnesota Timberwolves. Problem is, that isn't going to happen for another 4 years. Anthony Edwards is under contract, and I don't think the Minnesota Timberwolves are going to trade him anywhere, which is truly a shame because this man's chasing Michael Jordan, but at the same time, he has a tremendous personality that's made for television. This is a guy that's already acted in a movie. This is a guy that's known for his comical interviews.
So if you get a win tonight, that will breed confidence going into those next 4 games against teams in the similar spots beside you in the table.
Where you from, Jim?
Ireland.
I like your accent. It's tough.
So,
I want to learn how to talk like that. But ask your question again. I was too much listening to your accent.
A lot of people are saying that he's going to leave, but he can't leave for another 4 years. Until then, he is stuck on the Minnesota Timberwolves, who are clearly going nowhere. Because once again, the Minnesota Timberwolves went all in at the most inappropriate time, and as a result, they shot themselves in the foot. Let me know in the comment section down below. Is Anthony Edwards going to leave? Does he really have a choice? Well, seems like he's trapped for the meantime. I'd like to hear what you have to say. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.